Hey guys, welcome to my channel and thank you for being here today. Today's video is all about the books that I read in 2024. I set a goal for myself in 2024 because I had kind of gotten out of the habit of reading, and as a kid and in my teen years I was a really avid reader. I was always reading something, usually reading multiple things at the same time. And in my adult life, I just stopped at some point, and I don't really know when or why, but it's something that I wanted to get back into. So in 2024, I set myself the goal of reading 12 books. I thought it was a good place to start, and I succeeded. So that's what this video is all about. So some of the books I have here with me, and some of the books were audio books that I listened to, but I'm going to talk about each of them in no particular order, starting with one of my favorites of the year, which is Do Nothing. So it is called Do Nothing, and it states on the cover how to break free from overworking, overdoing, and underliving. So it really talks about how as a society we have lost the ability to just do nothing, and how in our culture being busy is seen as something to aspire to. It's something that's rewarded. You know, we're always saying, oh, I've just been so busy, I'm always go, 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 it just never stops. And that kind of cultural attitude towards life itself, you know, we've kind of lost the ability to just do nothing and relax. Hustle culture is so pervasive, and this goes into kind of how to break that cycle or just start to change your mindset around that, as well as going into the really interesting history of working itself and how we as humans, we weren't made to be working, you know, 9 to 5 days a week. Before the Industrial Revolution, that wasn't really a thing. Back when we were focused on jobs like farming and such, you know, we didn't work all year, we worked in season, and we worked at the hours that were best for the job itself, for the harvest. And it sort of goes into how we used to have a lot more free time, and how we used to just enjoy life a lot more without feeling like we have to constantly be doing something and go, 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 and how the Industrial Revolution came in and changed it all. So it's a super interesting read. I would highly recommend it. You can see I added a bunch of sticky tabs to the pages that I found the most interesting. It is written by Celeste Headlee, and I really can't say enough good things about this book. Highly recommend. Next up, which is a bit of a genre shift, but we have Dune. So I have to admit, I totally read this because of the movie coming out. The second movie came out in 2024, and I hadn't yet seen the first movie, so before going to see the second, I set myself the task of reading the book and then also watching the first movie, and I did that all in like a week, and it was a lot. It was a lot. It took me a while to really get into this, but it was a really interesting sci-fi read. I really enjoyed this. I did start reading the second book, but I didn't finish it. I don't know why, I just couldn't get into it. I was literally reading the end of this book in the car on the way to the cinema because I did not give myself enough time to read this book, and I booked the movie. I was like, I am not letting the movie spoil this for me. I've gotten so close. So I put myself under a little bit of stress that I didn't need to. I don't think the next movie is coming out until 2026 as far as I know, so definitely got a bit of time to wait. But in that time, maybe I'll read the rest of the books. I'm trying to see when the book was actually written. 1965, and it's by Frank Herbert. I think if you have already watched the movies, it's still definitely worth reading the book. It's like a sci-fi classic, so I'm glad the movies motivated me to actually read it. Also, please excuse this one nail that doesn't have nail polish on it. I smudged it not long after painting it yesterday and I just took it all off. I didn't get around to rereading it. I hope it's not too distracting. But this, I actually think, was the first book that I read in 2024. It is Brave New World. Why am I so bad at tracing? How did they do it? So this is another classic, this time in more of a dystopian genre. Dystopia is my favourite genre of book, and this was one that I hadn't read before, but I knew that it was a classic in that genre, so I put it on my Christmas list back in 2023, which sounds crazy to say. And then I read it at the start of the year after I received it. Trying to see when this one was written. Obviously another older book. (1932). Is that when it was written? That's when it's copyrighted. Yeah, first published in Great Britain in 1932, so pretty old. Isn't it crazy that it's not that long until that would have been 100 years ago that this book was written? This I found extremely enjoyable. I always find classic dystopias enjoyable. You can really see how this book was the blueprint for a lot of other dystopias throughout the years. And it's definitely one that I will reread. I do love rereading my dystopias. I just don't think they ever get old. And that's why a book like this holds up. If you are a fellow dystopia lover, let me know what your favourite dystopias are. I'd love to hear it. I'm always looking for new ones and old ones because I certainly haven't read them all. While we're sticking on the topic of dystopias, I have here Lord of the Flies, which I cannot believe I hadn't read this book earlier. It's been a book that has really intrigued me for literally years, since I was back in high school. I know some people do read this book in high school, but I didn't, which honestly probably for the best, because sometimes studying a book in high school kind of ruins it a little bit. It's why I haven't revisited Of Mice and Men, which I did really enjoy, but something about studying it in school kind of takes away some of the joy. Just me. One book that wasn't kind of ruined for me though from school was The Handmaid's Tale. I love that book. I have reread it several times. I love the show as well, and if you do enjoy the show and you want to read the book, or even just want to reread the book, I would highly recommend the audiobook because it's actually narrated by Elizabeth Moss, who plays Offred in the show. So it is a super immersive listen that just feels like an extension of the show if you do like the show. But just reading it in paper form is great as well. That's another one I love to revisit. And she did come out with a sequel, which I do also have. I think I've only read that one twice, but I do enjoy it as well, especially since at the end of The Handmaid's Tale you just think you're never going to find out what happened. I feel like I'm very lucky because I read The Handmaid's Tale so long after it came out, so I only had to wait a few years, maybe 5 years, until the sequel came out. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about. I got distracted. I love The Handmaid's Tale. What we're talking about now is Lord of the Flies, which this may be one of my favourite books of all time now that I've finally actually read it. Like I said, I can't believe I didn't read it earlier. So once again, a classic. I feel like you probably heard of this book before, so I don't know what I can say about it other than that I absolutely loved it. I think it's a really good commentary on human nature and the fact that it's the main characters are all children. It makes it extra haunting and also fascinating. It definitely gets me in my dystopia philosophy kind of brain. This one had me thinking for days afterwards. I couldn't stop thinking about it. So this is by William Golding, if you're curious, and because I'm curious, let's see when it was written. 1954. This I found to be a super easy read though. Maybe because it is for younger readers as well, like you can read it when you're a teenager. I mean, you can read all of these when you're a teenager, but this one specifically is read in schools a lot, I believe. Maybe more in America. I've never heard of anyone reading it in Australia or New Zealand, but if you haven't read it, read it. It's a classic for a reason, and it will make you think, it'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry. It's really great. The last physical book that I have with me is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This actually was one that I read in high school as well, so I don't know why I didn't think about it while I was on my little spiel about The Handmaid's Tale, because this is another one that was not ruined for me in school. I adore this book. It is all about the class divide between the Greases and the Associates in the 60s. And I think anyone who's ever felt like an outsider themselves will definitely relate to this. Obviously, I never dealt with the class disparity that is described in this book. It was a totally different time, but I think regardless, it's really easy to find a character to relate to, especially the main character, Ponyboy. And I think this is a book for everyone, especially if you have gone through struggles, or like I said, you felt like an outsider or someone who doesn't quite fit in or is from the wrong side of the tracks. If you've ever felt like surrounded by rich people. Me in high school. Yeah, like I said, never went through anything that to the extent of what the characters in this book go through, but it's a very relatable, heartfelt read. It was written by S.E. Hinton, who I very much admire because she wrote this when she was really young. I believe she was a teenager, and I think she wrote it due to the things that she herself had seen. This one was written in 1967, so it feels like a really authentic representation of what life might have been like during this time for people like the characters in this book. And like I said, I read this in school and it was not ruined for me. That's how good the book is. I think it's honestly timeless, and it is an easy read. Even the print itself is pretty big in this specific copy. So this was another one that I had asked for Christmas. And I was very excited to read it at the start of last year. Another one I will revisit over and over again. I'm excited that I have my own copy so I can do so whenever I wish. I did read a few other physical books this year. I just don't have them with me, so I'm going to do a little bit of mic brushing while I discuss them. First off, I read 2 financial books, one of which was called Strong Money Australia. I live in Australia. And the other was The Barefoot Investor, which is a very popular Australian book as well. I was interested in the world of investing, so I thought they would be a good start. Both books were really interesting, but I think I preferred Strong Money Australia just because it was a little bit more relatable to myself. It was written by a young man, older than myself, but someone who was a bit more similar to my own life situation. If I'm being really honest, I was a little bit disappointed with The Barefoot Investor. It's a book that has been recommended so many times and has such wonderful reviews, but honestly I think it was a bit overhyped. It just didn't feel like it was for me, so I don't regret reading it. It was still an interesting read, but I didn't enjoy it as much. This year I also read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I believe that's what the first book is called. All you Potterheads can correct me if I'm wrong, but I am new to the Harry Potter fandom. I've never seen the movies or read the books, believe it or not, but my sister is a really big fan and she's been wanting me to So, wish me luck on my endeavour. I'm pretty excited about it though. Now let's get into the audiobooks that I read / listened to this year. It was all autobiographies / memoirs. My favourite way to consume autobiographies is through audiobook if it is narrated by the author themselves, which I believe was the case for all of the books that I listened to this year. I think there's a lot of wisdom to be learned from autobiographies and also just a lot of entertainment. I like hearing about the kind of behind the scenes in the lives of people that I might see on screen or that I'm familiar with. And like I said, I think there's a lot of wisdom and perspective to be gained. So the first one I listened to, or at least the first one on my list, I can't actually remember, I think this was the first, was I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This was a book I'd heard a lot about. I always saw it around and heard people saying great things, and I can confirm it did not disappoint. It was so interesting hearing about her upbringing on Nickelodeon, but also just the relationship with her parents and especially her mother. It was really fascinating, and I really enjoyed and greatly appreciated how vulnerable and honest she was throughout the book. She also talked about her eating disorder, which I found to be really interesting, and like I said, she was so vulnerable, so honest. It was such an entertaining listen as well. Despite the subject matter, it wasn't too heavy. She managed to keep it lighthearted at points, and I felt like I really got to know her through the book, which I know sounds very parasocial, but it's one of the best autobiographies I've ever read, honestly. It's not overhyped. It is definitely worth a listen or read. One autobiography that I listened to that I did find really sad was Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry. That was sad for obvious reasons. I was listening to it after he passed, and I'd actually purchased the audiobook before he passed, and I intended to listen to it earlier, but I never got around to it, and listening to it after he passed gave it a whole new lens. It was really, honestly heartbreaking. He was also really vulnerable and honest about his addiction and how he had overcome it, but it was a constant battle, and knowing how he passed, it hit hard. It hit really hard. I am a huge fan of Friends, and Chandler is... it's hard to choose a favorite, but I think Chandler is my favorite, the character that I relate to the most, I think. Obviously Matthew Perry isn't Chandler, but he brought so much life and personality to that character, and he clearly adored playing that character and just adored the character in general. You can tell by the way he speaks about it in the book. So watching Friends wasn't the same. It isn't the same now that he's gone, and I felt the same way about the book. Hey, sweetie. You're gonna sit right there. Okay. My cat is sitting quite literally right next to the microphone, so if you hear any little purrs or noises, that's why. She's been sleeping all day. Anyway, I would highly recommend listening to or reading Matthew Perry's book. It's still a really entertaining read, and he managed to make it lighthearted in parts as well. I think that's just the nature of what his personality was, but I think just mentally prepare yourself that if you are a Matthew Perry fan, it may be a little difficult to listen to so close to his passing, which I know happened a while ago now, but it feels like it only just did. My little squishmallow is going to join us while I talk about the next books because he's cute and gives me something to tap on. So the next book that I listened to was Wildflower by Drew Barrymore. This I found to be very inspirational and fun. She obviously went through a lot in her childhood, and she came out the other side, and she's such an inspiration. She's a big inspiration to me, and she's a wonderful actress, and she's been in the public eye for so long. But it was really interesting getting to hear her tell her story herself. I loved hearing about her friendships, especially with Cameron Diaz. That was really heartwarming. And she's just lived such a fascinating life. It was a really fun read. But like I said, it was also very inspirational. So I'd highly recommend that one. I think honestly all the books that I've read this year I've really enjoyed. Other than the Barefoot Investor, which was a bit meh. But the rest, I'm just realising now I'm really lucky that I really enjoyed them all. Another autobiography that I absolutely loved, I think it may have been my favourite. It's a hard one, but it may have been my favourite that I listened to this year was Love, Pamela by Pamela Anderson. She's another person, much like Drew Barrymore, who went through so much, who has gone through so much both in her early life and while in the public eye. And I think she's someone that is often perceived quite incorrectly. So getting to hear her tell her story, and she narrates the book, it was so interesting. I think this was one of the most inspirational audiobooks that I listened to this year. She has such a beautiful perspective on life, and she's just a beautiful person inside and out. She really does show that beauty comes from within, despite being one of the biggest, beauty symbols. But it was fascinating, it was heartwarming, it was heartbreaking, it was really interesting. And it made me gain even more respect for Pamela Anderson, who is someone that I've always found very intriguing. In case you haven't noticed, I love reading books about strong women who have gone through a lot but come through the other side and are really inspiring. That's the theme of my autobiographies for the most part, which leads me to the next one, which was Homework by Julie Andrews. Julie Andrews was a big part of my childhood, with Mary Poppins, The Sound of Music, and of course, iconically, The Princess Diaries. So I was always interested in her and what her life was, and I was delighted by her book. She went into her Hollywood years and filming different projects, and it was so interesting, once again, hearing her story from her perspective. She's an icon, she's a legend, she is so beloved, but I can't say I knew a lot about her personal life, so it was a really interesting and heartfelt listen. She was very cheeky and delightful, and she's, everyone's grandmother, and I love her, and I loved the book, so I would recommend if you are a Julie Andrews fan like myself. And with that, I think that brings me to the end of the video. There may have been a book that I forgot, but from what I can recall, this was everything that I read in 2024. So here's to another year of great reading. Hopefully 2025 will be just as enjoyable. I am hoping to read even more books than I read in 2024. I know 12 or 13, whatever it was that I read. Wicked. I read Wicked. I forgot. I read Wicked. I only just finished it, but I read the bulk of it in 2024, and it was really dark and heavy, and it was a lot, but it was very interesting, entertaining, and you don't need to read the book before seeing the musical, the movie. They're quite different, but I knew that going in, and I knew that Wicked the book was a lot darker, and it was a really interesting read. It was slow at points, I will admit. It's also a book that perhaps I didn't love, but I liked it. I don't know that I would reread it. Hopefully the Wicked stands don't come for me. I know Wicked is very beloved, and I really enjoyed the musical, but the book was just a little bit slow for me at points. But it's another iconic book, so that's just me. But with that, I believe that is really the last of the books that I read. So yes, hoping to read more in 2025. 12 was a goal that I could reach, and I thought that was realistic for myself, so I'm just trying to beat that this year in 2025. Let me know what books you read in 2024 or what you're hoping to read, and once again, thank you for being here. Bye.